I really think that some of the things I'm seeing today makes me wonder if the world has gone a little bit nuts. I mean, a little bit crazy in terms of this reaction and how governments are reacting to the illness. Uh, I noticed in the local park today, actually yesterday, that there's now a sign suggesting that locals are only permitted in the park and non-locals are not allowed in the park. And I heard from someone else that a lot of the local businesses, like touristy businesses, so the onsen, the hot spring baths, are now not allowing people who don't live here into the baths. So they're rejecting tourists basically from these locations. Now that seems pretty bad, but it's not actually as bad as some of the stuff I've seen from other places in the world. In the United States, in Los Angeles, the governor actually filled in skate parks with sand so that the skaters wouldn't be able to gather there. In other places in the United States, they're arresting people for simply visiting local parks. They are telling old people that they're not allowed to sit on chairs in the beach. They're allowed to sit on the sand on the beach, but not on the chairs for some reason. And this all reminds me of a talk I gave in Singapore a while ago. I was actually asked by the alumni to go to a sort of TED Talk style presentation. And they wanted to know about the risks of terrorist attack in Singapore. This was after a major terrorist attack had occurred nearby, and they were worried about terrorists from Malaysia actually doing some kind of activity in Singapore. And the students and alumni there were kind of worried and curious about what I thought about this. So I gave a talk on why their risk is actually really low, and I showed them the data from actual statistics and why their risks are quite low in Singapore in terms of terrorist attack and the chances of being in the wrong place at the wrong time and actually something bad happening to. Very, very low. But I said that the real risk of the terrorist sort of thinking about terrorism is the government locking you down. And I reminded them basically by asking them, where is the safest place on Earth? If you can imagine the safest place ever, where would that be? What would it look like? And of course, when you think of a safe, you think of an actual safe, right? What does a safe look like? Where is the safest place? It's inside a safe. So what do you put inside a safe? You put money and gold and things in there, right? And what's a safe look like? Well, it's a steel box and it's locked, right? So the question is, do you want to live in a steel locked box? I mean, there are other kinds of places like that, right? Prisons, jails, those are safe places. Your house is sort of a safe place, but do you want to spend the rest of your life in your house, right? Those are the questions that we have to answer. And we really have to think carefully about where the line is in terms of the balance between taking risks and being pushed into this safe box where you can't leave, where you're trying to keep yourself completely safe from everything.
Yeah, I think we went too far.
When you are born, you start to die, right? I mean, we are all mortal beings. We know that someday we are going to die. And then the question is, how do you balance the risks of your activities with sort of living a life that you want to live? I mean, I can just imagine the kinds of risks that people take in their everyday lives. Getting into a car is a huge risk. Getting into a car with someone you don't know is an even bigger risk, right? How do you know that they drive well? Every time I get into the car, I realize that I'm taking a big risk driving. And other people on the road are at risk too, and that's why I have to be very careful when I'm driving, right? Kids walking down the streets are taking a big risk just being on the street. So where is the line that you want to draw? What activities are permissible? What activities are not? Now, I think the reason the governments are able to get away with this so much these days is because there's so much uncertainty. We know how many car accidents there are. We know what happens when there's a car accident. We know the likelihood of dying. We know how many people die of heart attacks. We know how many people die of all these kinds of illnesses that are around every day. We know how much going for a walk helps me with my health. And I know that by not going for that walk, I'm taking a risk, right? But we have a lot of uncertainty around this, and so that might add to the confusion and add to the ability for governments to actually do something like this. But we really need to think carefully about balancing our lives and making sure that we're not putting ourselves into a literal prison by allowing the governments to force us to keep us in our homes or keep us in the safe place or even depending on the government for keeping us safe from everything in this planet. That just simply can't happen. And so we need to consider these issues very closely.